back here at the 67 Dart. We're going to start fitting the LS motor in here. So we're going to get the hood off and get it in the air, and we'll show you some of the issues that we're going to run into by trying to put a Chevy motor into this Mopar. All right, let's go. All right, now that we're under here, the first thing we're going to go over is oil pan clearance. These Mopars, they have the rear steer, and this is right where the rear sump of the oil pan would want to sit. So this is in the way. Really what it needs is a mid-sump oil pan. I don't have one. I have a couple front sumps. So we're going to notch the K-member out to make room for the front sump oil pan. Most LS engines are rear sump. We can go over and look at these oil pans real quick. This is your average truck oil pan rear sump, and this is like a sheet metal just type of front sump, and then this is actually from a Trailblazer SS front sump. You know, these are nice because they have the oil filter built right in, whereas this one would have to be relocated. So at this point, this is the oil pan we're going to try and fit in there. So we'll set that up in there and go over some of the issues that we're going to have. Alright, so it looks like it fits in there okay, but if you look at where the firewall is, the motor needs to go forward 3 more inches easy. So maybe not 3, but 2, something like that. So we're going to notch our K-member and try and move the oil pan so that the steering is closer to the rear of the oil pan. Probably clearing some of these tabs off since we're not using a 4-wheel drive front diff. So that's where we're going to start.
Who's operating?
Uh-oh. Got fire. The reality here is that I can always cut more. Alright, we got a rough cut. We're just gonna set this oil pan in and see what it looks like. Obviously, the cut needs to be cleaned up, ground down, and then boxed in, but we're just trying to get an idea of oil pan clearance to make sure that we have room to clear the firewall. I got about an inch or two, probably about an inch and a half, 2 inches from the back of the firewall. So honestly, that's probably enough. I'll leave it at that. I won't box the subframe in yet. I won't do anything, but I'll leave it at that until I can get the motor set in there and see what it looks like. I will trim some of these tabs off the oil pan though that I'm not going to use. Shift this a little this way, probably get rid of this one. There's one right here that's going to go because that's limiting how far forward it can go. All right, the next thing we need to do is, this is the engine that we're planning on using in the car. At this point, I'm going to strip it down just to make it easier going in and out, test fitting it. It's a drive-by-wire Gen 3, I think, LS based motor. Going to use a Turbo 350, so we're not going to need the computer to control the transmission. I don't know if this is the computer we're going to use in harness or if we're going to get a drive-by cable. I mean, there's also the Holly, but that's more money. So probably not using this throttle body because it's drive-by-wire. So we'll pull the manifolds off, we'll pull the coils in the intake, and just get it simplified so that we can test fit it into the car and see how it fits and go from there. All right, a really common thing on these LS motors is the exhaust manifold bolts break. None of these broke coming out, but these ones were already broken in there. There's enough out that you could get a stud extractor on there, but what I like to do is just take a nut and put it on there and weld it on and then use an impact gun to take it off. Sometimes they break a little bit recessed and you can take your MIG gun and build the weld up, put the nut on there, and then weld it on and get them out. So this is how I like to do it. Put the nut on and weld it on. So here we go. There it is, just a nut welded to the broken bolt. We'll go do the other side. All right, same thing on this side. Stud, nut. I normally clamp it in the ground clamp at first just to make sure it's making good connection. Hang it up there. Sometimes I give it a little tack to hold it in place, then put it on a head bolt here, maybe. Oh. This is actually the way I do it on any brand. Ford, Dodge, Chevy. I mean, all the trucks seem to do this. And that's the way I do it. I don't know that I ever drill them out anymore. All right, next up, we're gonna pick this thing up. I'm gonna remove the motor mounts. I'm gonna remove the oil pan so we can test fit the other oil pan. Once the oil pan's on, we're gonna try and put the trans on so it'll be a complete drive line. And then we're gonna slip it in and see how it fits with the oil pan and see how far the motor is from the firewall to see if we have to move it forward or backwards. I wanna try and keep it back as far as possible, but also leave room in case I ever go to a bigger trans. I don't have to try and cut the firewall out. Because the Turbo 350 is not a very big trans. You know, maybe I'll put a 4L80 in it. I have one, but right now I'm not really looking for the overdrive and the weight. Just trying to get this thing together and see how it works. All right, let's do it. Hey, look at that. All right, we're gonna take these motor mounts off. We're gonna have to build motor mounts from scratch, most likely. So we're gonna put the trans on, set the motor in, and see where things seem to line up. And we'll build motor mounts accordingly. I'm gonna buzz the oil pan off and stick the new one on temporarily so we can set the motor in the car and see how it fits. So we'll buzz off all these 10 millimeters that hold the pan on. Just kind of reaching under here, not really getting underneath the engine because it's on a cherry picker. Alright, I got the drain pan under there to catch the residual oil that's going to drip out of the tube. I'll have to take the pickup tube off here also because the front sump pan doesn't use this pickup tube. So let me grab is it a 10? All right, if you focus in on this O-ring here, especially on the newer cars, this O-ring goes bad all the time and these motors lose oil pressure. Lots of times you get these trucks with low oil pressure and this is why. I've done a few of these. Simple $3 O-ring fixes your oil pressure issue. You're back on the road. It's just a lot of work to take the pan off. All right, so before I bolt this pan on, I'm gonna make a baffle for it. These being front sump, they tend to starve the pickup for oil on hard launches. This is an aftermarket pan. This is an OEM pan. And as you can see in this aftermarket pan, it has this flap that when the rear valley fills with oil, normal driving, this can allow oil to come back in to the front sump. And it would just go like this. But on a hard launch, this slams shut and the oil from inertia going backwards kind of just closes it and it helps retain a good amount of oil in the front sump for the oil pickup tube to suck up. The original Trailblazer SS oil pan has nothing, so on hard launches, the oil sloshes to the back and the sump starves for oil. So you can make a little window sump, a little, you know, window one like that, or just at least put some type of baffle in here because you want to slow up that oil. You don't want to seal it off completely because then you'll flood the back of the pan and starve the sump for oil just driving down the highway. You need the oil to make its way back to the front. So, like as you can see in this aftermarket pan, they have even left a gap underneath the baffle, probably about 3/16, so that the oil, when it's warmed up, can easily make its way back to the front. You're just trying to slow it down on hard launches from going backwards too fast. So we'll make a little baffle and stick it in there and put the pan on. No gasket at this point because it'll have to come off again, I'm sure. We're just mocking things up at this stage. Alright, put this side up. So we're putting a 5.3 LS mated to an old small block turbo 350. They don't bolt together without using either a flywheel spacer or one of these little hub, torque converter snout adapters. The flex plate, the 3 bolts, are going to be a little bit off. If I can line it up here. Oh, it goes this way. So when you get it on there, you'll see that they're just not quite right. So what you'll have to do is 1, 2, 3, you'll have to oblong these a little bit so that the torque converter lines up. Those are just holding the torque converter to the flex plate. What centers it is this little adapter. This fits snugly on the converter. I had to sand the paint off to get it to slide on there. And then it goes snugly into your flex plate, like that. And that's what centers it and holds it in place. This is just a dry fit. We're not putting it together right now. We're just putting this together for mock-up. So put that in there, oblong your holes, bolt the converter on. And you'll want to double check when you do that the converter's not squished in there too tight. Your converter should have a little bit of movement forward and backwards for when it gets hot, it's going to balloon a little bit. So if you put this together and your converter's jammed in there tight, something's wrong. You either did it wrong or you got to get a different flex plate. I think some of the 6 liters use a longer crankshaft, so you may have to do more homework. But I've used a couple of these 5.3s on the older transmissions, and all I ever used was this and hogged out the holes. So we're going to stick it on there for mock-up purposes, and then we're going to drop it in the car and see how it goes. All right, another thing that I seem to run into a lot when I get these motors is the dowel pins are missing. Here's a dowel pin, and here's a dowel pin missing. When the transmission's on the motor for a long time, they get really stuck together, which is why you see people breaking the bell housings, getting the transmissions off. They wrench them off, and it breaks the bell housings. So sometimes you're missing dowel pins. All these dowel pins are, as you can see, 0.625, what is that, 0.621, 0.630. 0.625 is 5/8. So this is just 5/8 bar. So you just grind a taper on here and cut a chunk off and grind a taper on the other side and hammer it in, and you got a dowel pin. So instead of waiting, looking for a dowel pin, I just make my own. Instant dowel pin. Now I don't have to go to the junkyard or order one. Now we're gonna try and put our dowel pin in. Put your fingers there. Ready? All right, mine's on yours. Just get it set on it before you gotta go.
Yeah.
So you just start a bolt. Yeah. right, so we made good progress. The engine and trans are in. They're mocked up. We have to make motor mounts and the trans cross member. There's a lot of things obviously to finish, from intake, cooling system, headers, but you know, a big chunk of the mock-up's done, just having the motor sitting in here. So we're gonna wrap it up for now and come back to it when we can.